Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Arts Action Fund's Political Insider Quarterly Briefing. My name is Nina Ozlu Tunceli, and I am your Executive Director. And with me today is David Reid, Policy Director at the very influential Brownstein firm that is the largest lobbying firm in Washington, D.C. We're so thrilled to have him with us. He's been working in the government affairs world at a very high level for many, many years. And he serves as our pro bono counsel as well. Very pleased to have you, David. Welcome.
Looking forward to the conversation.
Yes.
Thanks for having me.
So here's the format, everybody. I am going to begin with asking David a series of questions, but as you have questions, I'd like you to post it in the Q&A. You'll see if you just look down on your screen, there's a Q&A box there. And we will be looking at those Q&As for the next half hour, because it's going to be a fast 30-minute discussion to give you snapshots of what's going on in Congress, what's recently happened, and just looking ahead a little bit. So I'm going to begin with a series of questions that I'd like to ask, and we'll see how much we can get through. But meanwhile, I will be looking at questions. And if there is a link that we end up posting to you, we'll post it in the chat room. So here we go. The FY24 appropriations process, David, which goes from September 2023 to October of 2023 to October of 2024. It just got finalized last month. We're 6 months into that fiscal year. Is this something that we should expect for the next upcoming FY25 fiscal year, that legislation that we're working on right now?
Yes, I think that given the slim majority that Speaker Johnson has in the House, as well as the slim majority in the Senate, you're going to continue to see, a kind of prolonged debate around the appropriations process. So, we anticipate another series of continuing resolutions, so essentially kicking the can down the road throughout the next few months, and likely to see us kick that, past the upcoming deadline in September, potentially into the lame duck time, or the lame duck period, which is post-election, but pre the new Congress being sworn in, and potentially then into 2025. So, a whole lot of the same on that front.
Right. So what extended this whole period this long is the havoc that the Freedom Caucus was causing on the House side. And some of the things that they did in the first round of getting these bills through before it went to a unified conference bill is that they slashed funding for things like everything from the environment to education to healthcare and things like that. And they also were applying these weird socially conservative riders, everything from not allowing the Department of Defense to do DEI programs, to interfering with LGBTQ healthcare, abortion issues. In the end, none of them went through. How did that happen?
One word: the Senate, or I guess that's two words. But the Senate was the stop on those riders, as well as those severe cuts. There was a deal struck between, House and Senate, Democratic and Republican leaders in the White House several months ago that hit the numbers, or that basically set the top line number. And that's essentially where they ended up, even though there was a lot of noise being made to try to go at numbers that were lower than that cap. And then, of course, the social riders and the amendments that the House Republicans and a lot of the far right were inserting were never going to actually see the light of day. And that was an assurance that was made by both the Democratic leaders and the Republican leaders in the Senate Appropriations Committee, Susan Collins and Patty Murray. Conversations that I had, and I know, Nina, you were part of a number of those conversations over the last few months, saying that they would not have any poison pills, as they call them, in the final product, and we saw that to be the case.
Do you think they'll attempt to do that again this year? for the
I
25?
I do. I think that, you know, you're going to continue to see the you know, again, through being led by the Freedom Caucus and a number of others, you know, a desire to try to insert their priorities into those bills, a number of them that will not pass, you know, a Democratic Senate. You know, I think that there's going to continue to be a you know, a bit of a push and a pull amongst the Republicans in the Republican conference on the House side that we saw before. Those that are kind of the, you know, wanting to cut deals and get things done group, you know, kind of the pragmatists, and then those that are, you know, more desiring of you know, making that noise and you know, sort of notching wins, quote unquote, in their mind to you know, sort of boost their conservative bona fides. So yes, I think you're going to continue to see those efforts. So I think that that means that, you know, the work that we do is very important, ensuring that, you know, the priorities, especially around arts funding, continue to be front and center. Because again, yes, we hope that that stopgap with the Senate will exist and will continue to remain strong. But, you know, it is only helpful to have the advocates and folks making sure that what it is that we are fighting for is clear as an important priority for, you know, their constituents.
Also, House Democrats ended up playing a role too as a result of the conference bill that was negotiated going to the floor under suspension, and with so many Democrats voting for it. Could you explain that process?
Sure. So traditionally what you would have is you would have bills like these go through the Rules Committee. They then are voted out by the Rules Committee on a simple majority, and then they then, you know, are decided that it is decided that they go to the floor for a vote. When Speaker McCarthy was in the process of securing his speakership, he actually filled that committee with a number of hardline conservatives that have proven to be, you know, very much
The
digging
Freedom
their
Caucus members,
Freedom Caucus members, yes. Sort of dig their heels in whenever there are bills that are put to the Rules Committee that they don't agree with. So they essentially cause those rules to fail. So a way to bypass that is to suspend the rules and have these bills go on suspension. And that requires a 2/3 majority in the House. And that then, of course, by the nature of it, requires Democrats to sign on to the bill's, you know, movement to the floor, and then, you know, to, you know, either to the Senate or to the president's desk, depending upon the order of the bill. So yes, in order for this bill and a number of bills to pass and to have passed in the 118th, Speaker Johnson has had to rely on Democratic votes through that process of suspension votes.
Right. And so that bypassing the Freedom Caucus members on that Rules Committee, which was their way of controlling how the House voted on things, made them very angry, as I understand it, because in the end, when the House passed these appropriation bills, the majority, there was a higher majority of Democrats voting on the bill as opposed to Republicans, which broke a rule within the Republican caucus that I guess that no bill should ever pass the House without it being majority Republican, since they
majority of the majority, right?
Majority of the majority. So that there's going to be fallout from that, and one of the pieces of fallout is Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, a very conservative member, has submitted a petition or that she may put forward a motion to vacate current speaker and unseating a second speaker of the House in this particular Congress. What do you think about that? What's the viability fallout from that?
Sure. So this is the same. This was the same, you know, procedure that was used to oust former Speaker McCarthy, and it was, you know, as you said, the passage of the appropriations bill that upset Marjorie Taylor Greene to, you know, lead her to file that motion to vacate. She filed that right before they left for the 2-week recess that they're coming back from next week. So essentially what she says that it is a warning. So there has to be another step has to be taken in order to actually make that live, to then actually put that vote out there in order to oust Speaker Johnson. And there is the potential for either her or others in the Freedom Caucus or other conservative Republicans to move forward with that. I think the next few things that may actually upset that contingent are the potential for a Ukraine supplemental vote. A number of those in the Freedom Caucus are against any additional spending to Ukraine. Speaker Johnson has mentioned that he was interested in putting something on the floor soon after their return. So depending upon how that goes, that could, be the straw that breaks the camel's back. And a few other things that will, of course, require Democratic votes in order to, move forward in process. So that is something that is hanging over Speaker Johnson's head. But unfortunately, given the way that the rules are set, that allows for one single member to file that motion to vacate, there will be that threat. But at the end of the day, the business of the people and the business of Congress has to go on. And there is that risk of him having an even shorter speakership than Speaker McCarthy.
Yeah. So let's talk about if a Ukraine vote does go forward for a vote on the floor. We know that the great majority of Democrats are in support of this, and so they would want to vote for it. And there are many Republicans who want to support this. It's really that conservative Freedom Caucus end who doesn't want this. Theoretically, it could get voted on, and then that is when she will probably apply her motion, or someone else will apply the motion. And the idea that I've heard that I'd love you to talk a little bit more about is, while the attempt to oust Speaker McCarthy went through, not a single Democrat voted against him being vacated. But a deal might be struck with Democrats that if you do, Speaker Johnson, if you do put forward a Ukraine aid package to come to the floor that passes, we will actually vote to prevent you from being vacated. What do you think about that theory and the possibility?
Sure. And Leader Jeffries had mentioned that this might be a possibility, that there would be, a number of people within the Democratic caucus that would, help to ensure that he doesn't get ousted. And of course, that would be, the understanding would be that because he's voting on Ukraine aid and pushing forward on that would be, rewarded by those Democrats that want to see that done, knowing that he will likely face a threat from his own conference. There is a problem with that, though, in that you would likely see those Republicans that potentially wouldn't vote on a motion to vacate or support that would potentially move in line and in favor of that motion to vacate if they see that it is Democrats that is helping him to ensure his continued hold on that position of speaker, which would essentially mean that it would backfire, and you would have a unified front voting to oust him as speaker. There are other things that Speaker Johnson has attempted to do to thread the needle on Ukraine aid. A number of things to try to placate the conservative base. One being, potentially, cutting a deal that would essentially lift the restrictions on the liquid natural gas exports as part of that, as part of a deal to move Ukraine aid. Another one is to incorporate the Repo Act, which essentially requires the use of seized Russian assets to help pay for some of these Ukraine, this Ukraine funding. Problem with that is most of that money is actually not in the United States. It's in Europe. And then a few other things. But, it's a sort of sticky situation, to say the least. And it's not as clear cut as you vote for Ukraine aid, the Democrats will help ensure that you don't lose your speakership. Because, again, it could backfire, or very quickly down the line, he won't be able to run his caucus or the Republican conference, because he will be seen as someone who is only there by the grace of the Democratic Party.
Right. Very difficult position. still needs to govern that Congress for the remainder of this year. I want to ask, why is this important for those who are arts advocates, and knowing these kind of bigger political things going on, and why someone like a Speaker Johnson may actually be good at this time for the arts as opposed to something else?
Sure. So if he is ousted, that would of course throw the House into chaos yet again. One argument against them actually moving forward with that is that there's also not as much pent up distrust for Johnson as there had been for McCarthy over the years of him being in positions of leadership that he was in. So seeing him continue to be in the role that he is in and not wishing chaos upon the House is actually beneficial for the purpose of the appropriations process moving forward, even though it's going to likely be delayed, similar to the way that it was for FY24. If you have another period of upheaval like you did earlier, with the ousting of McCarthy, that risks the continued kicking of the can down the road, and the potential for a year-long CR at the end of this, which isn't good because that would mean earmarks wouldn't move forward. That would also mean that you would be level funded, or just the continuation of what FY24's numbers are, without the potential for increase or for the potential of additional programs that I know we are fighting for and you all are fighting for every day being included in what it is that we're pushing for FY25.
Got it. You mentioned earmarks. Do you happen to know about how many billions of dollars in earmarks got passed in this?
Quite a lot. Quite a number of billion. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but I do know that it was in terms of the bigger budget, the broader budget, not a huge amount, but amounts that are significant and helpful. You've got a number of elected officials that voted against the appropriations bill at the end of the day, but they're touting the money and the pork that they brought home, and a number of really terrific projects that I know we've worked on with the arts community to help fund community theaters and arts education programs and the like, that House members and senators really are proud of. So when there is a threat to the appropriations bills moving forward, and that threat, there is that threat to those funds that they're hopefully bringing home and being able to tout that will benefit them as the incumbents, you hope that has an impact. That's the whole point of them. The reason you have the earmark process is to ensure that that builds in additional incentive to actually move forward, to cut deals and get appropriations packages across the finish line.
Right. I want to remind our audience that if you have a question, to please put it in the Q&A in our final 10 minutes. But I'll continue to ask David some more questions until I see one pop up. So David, there are 12 appropriations subcommittees that all kind of go into the chair of the full appropriations committee. And on the House side, a wonderful moderate Republican named Kay Granger, representing Fort Worth, Texas, who's been the chair this year of the full appropriations committee and has been a guardian of a lot of arts related issues. She has announced that she is going to be stepping down, and she's going to do it early, so that the new chairman can begin as early as maybe the end of this month. Can you talk about why that role is important, and the prospects of electing the next chairman?
Sure. So the process has already started. She had, of course, made the announcement, several weeks back, and it's the Republican Steering Committee that makes the decision that votes on who that next chair will be. The odds-on favorite are Tom Cole of Oklahoma, whom I know that a number of folks on this call, and I know Americans for the Arts has a solid relationship with. He is a champion of the arts and has been, has been an ally for a number of us for years on that front. He's the favorite. They, I believe, are supposed to have that meeting, that election on April 9th, so next week. However, Adderholt, Republican, also a Republican, of course, from Alabama, has longtime appropriator and Cardinal himself has indicated that he also would like to be considered for the chair role, or for the the top role if they're not in the majority next next go around. And he's asked for a delay on that vote. So, I think that at the end of the day, it will be Cole, and I think that it will, continue to be a positive working relationship, in that sense, similar to the working relationship that we'd had with Kay Granger.
Right. We do have two questions from our audience. You had mentioned earmarks. And by the way, for those on the call, Americans for the Arts is working on a chart of all of the arts-related earmarks that got funded in the FY24 bill, primarily coming from the Senate because of that rule that happened. And we're going to explain that again. And what this question is do you have any sense of when on the House or the Senate side, they will be putting out their what's known as, we know as earmarks, but they call it community project funds guidelines? When will they become available, and what's some advice on how they should proceed?
Sure. So the House and the Senate individual member offices have already put out, most of them, at least on the Senate side, have already put out their own individual guidance for individuals and groups to submit those requests for earmarks. A number of those deadlines have passed to get those submitted to the individual member offices. And then, of course, the process is that the members will review those requests. Then they will then, move forward with putting forward their top requests from those to the subcommittees for consideration, into the broader appropriations package. What we have not gotten yet is subcommittee guidelines, and that is what is, that those are the guidelines that actually govern how the earmarks will be reviewed and then also included and then approved. We expect that to be soon. I think the first order of business, at least on the House side, is for them to get a new appropriations chair first and foremost. Then they'll move forward likely with those committee guidelines that will be put out, and then the committee deadlines too. And those deadlines are the deadlines that are set for the individual House and Senate members to get their requests into the subcommittees.
Okay, thank you. I want to just add a little bit more to that and say that, so the process is, first, you have to submit it to the member that you're asking them to carry forward your earmark request or your CPF request to the committees that would ultimately fund it. The question you asked from the Q&A is on the House side. I just want to remind and underscore that this particular Republican-controlled Congress made a decision last year that arts-related CPFs earmarks will not be entertained on a House bill. But the Senate, you can. So you want to focus on your senators if this is an arts-related earmark that you're going for. And then what David mentioned is that every senator puts on their portal of their website the guidelines of how they will accept requests for anything from earmarks or how much you would like the NEA to be funded. It's that wide and varied. And they all have their own deadlines internally to be able to receive all the requests and organize them and determine which ones they are going to endorse and put forward to the correct subcommittee on appropriations. And David has already said that those subcommittees have not released their guidelines yet, but it's all going to happen very fast, very, very fast. And it's probably going to be sometime in late April, May. But those internal Senate deadlines or House deadlines, they're already happening, and probably 20% have closed their deadlines, but many are still open, but they're closing soon. How do you find out what the deadline is? Go to their website of the member you're interested in having them carry forward the request. I have another question, and that is, what is the short or long-term effects, David, of all the recent retirements that we're seeing from House Republicans, and I would even add House Democrats?
Yes, and you've actually got more House Democrats and Democrats in general that have announced their retirement than Republicans. So, I think the short term for the immediate, return of Congress for the next session, next Congress next year, is that you're going to have a lot of institutional knowledge that is going to be lost. And a lot of the folks that are true creatures of the Congress and of the institution are not going to be there. And that for many respects is not a good thing, because the cogs in the wheels of the legislative branch depend on that. So I think you're going to see some downsides because of that. And in the longer term, looking at the political makeup of those folks that will likely be coming in to replace those, are that it's going to likely be folks that are going to be on more on the polar ends of the spectrum that will be coming in, which, you've got a number of folks that are leaving that were seen as sort of the, people that would help to negotiate deals and bridge the gap between the two sides. You've got Sinema leaving that is seen as someone, as someone who would help to cut a lot of bipartisan deals, love her or hate her. She was someone that did help to bridge that divide and bring folks together on a number of big packages. You've got a number of others in the House as well that have played that role that are going to be leaving on both sides of the aisle. So I think the longer term impact is going to be, the continued unfortunate polarization and the likely dysfunction that will come from that. That said, you have had a number of folks that came in as rabble rousers in their first terms that learned the joy, I guess, if you could call it, of governing. And they became people that actually understood and appreciated and became, true legislators in and of themselves. So that can also happen too. But I think, the short term is the loss of institutional knowledge, and then the long term being, the continued unfortunate polarization, with the caveat that some of those people may very well move into a position of wanting to cut deals and get things done.
Can you look into your crystal ball, David, and tell me, after as a result of the upcoming election on November 5th, will the House flip to Democratic control? Will the Senate flip to Republican control?
I think that a few weeks ago, people were saying that the likely scenario is a flip of the House to the Democrats and a flip of the Senate to the Republicans. I think, it's obviously still too early to tell. Polls have been notoriously inaccurate, and a lot can happen between now and November, or now and when ballots start to hit people's mailboxes. But I do still think that there is a very high chance that the Senate does flip, just given how the map has shaken out. You've got a number of very, very vulnerable Democrats that are defending their seats in states that were big Trump winners, like in Montana, places in, like Ohio. So you've got Tester and Brown in those states respectively that are defending their seats. Senator Rosen in Nevada. I saw that Amy Walters, who is a pollster for the National Journal, or for the Cook Political Report with the National Journal, just moved that race from lean Democrat to toss-up. So again, I think that a place like Nevada, I think she ends up eking it out. But I do think that the overarching trend lines, would have it be a potential likely flip from the Senate, from the Democrats to the Republicans. House, the current House majority has not done itself any favors in terms of, showcasing their ability to legislate. Again, because of the slim majority and because of the turmoil from earlier this Congress. So I think a number of folks think that that's the real opportunity for Democrats, is to retake the majority there. And then, of course, the presidential, that's up in the air as well. At this point, we'll continue to monitor that. The Democrats currently have a cash advantage and a cash lead. The presumptive nominee Trump obviously has his baggage and issues, and is continuing to deal with the legal issues there and the cost that is having on the campaign funds and the outside spending funds that have been contributed towards that effort. But again, as I said before, it's still early. People are just starting to tune in, and it'll be a lot to see over the coming few months.
Okay, great. I'm mindful of time. Let me know if you have to hop off, and I can answer maybe some of the questions. But you just let me know.
Sure, I've got just a few. I can stay on for just a few more minutes.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to go a little bit longer than 30 minutes, folks. So we have two tax-related questions. One is someone who was hopeful that there could be more legislation on donor-advised funds. And another question about the Charitable Act of being able to donate to charities on the front page of your tax return instead of being an itemizer. Any chance, I want to take it from, I want you to answer from a bigger realm, and that is any chance of a tax bill happening this year?
So there was, obviously a big tax package that was pushed from the House and passed the House and is now in the laps of the Senate. That currently is stalled. And the folks that know a lot more about tax in my practice, in my shop, are fairly confident that it's pretty dead, unfortunately. You've got Crapo, who leads the tax committee, the Senate Finance Committee on the Republican side, has poured a lot of cold water on that for a number of reasons. There are apprehensions about the way that the child tax credit works, and a number of Republicans who do not see eye to eye with the way that's written in the bill that came from the House. And then you have some Democrats too that are opposed to some of the provisions that are extended from the Trump tax bill in the previous administration that are part of that package. So that was the big hope, when it first passed with large bipartisan support, out of the House. But it's looking like that's kind of dead on arrival. Now, I do think there are potential opportunities for, there to be some tax, cats and dogs, so to say, being incorporated into some of the must-pass packages that are coming down the pike over the coming few months. But I think a broader package that would allow for the, certain provisions like you mentioned, Laurie and Charles, is not as likely as you would otherwise see.
Yeah, and we recently had a fly-in with Americans for the Arts and the Arts Action Fund to meet with some of those tax legislators, and they pretty much confirmed exactly what you said, David, that it's unlikely and it's unfortunate as well.
Mm-hmm.
We have a question that's very timely about is Americans for the Arts following the work of PNTC, the Performance Nonprofit Theater Coalition, advocacy through Arnold and Porter? And I believe what Michael is referring to is the Stage Act. I'll say a little bit, and then maybe David, you could say a little bit, but the Stage Act looks like it's going to be introduced by Senator Peter Welch of Vermont, independent from Vermont, this coming week when Congress is back in session. And I believe that the PNTC is bringing a coalition of members and maybe even some celebrities as well to kind of bring visible attention to the introduction of that bill. Americans for the Arts and the Arts Action Fund just got a peek of that legislation about 2 days ago. So we don't have enough time to kind of evaluate. I am a little bit with a bill that is asking for $1 billion a year through the Department of Commerce for primarily just nonprofit theater, I think is narrow, especially with a group called Americans for the Arts. We believe in all the arts, so I'd like to see a lot more of the performing arts at minimum be incorporated in that. And quite frankly, when the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant got passed, one of the main reasons it got passed is the Broadway community was able to get the proposed legislation for Save Our Stages to be changed to include the private for theater division of Broadway and other areas. And that got Senator Schumer on board to make this be a bill that comes to the floor as leader of the Senate. So I think there might be a few political shortcomings in it, but tell you the truth, we need more time to analyze it. It needs to come before our cultural advocacy group partners to really evaluate the bill, but we are definitely following it. And David, did you want to make any thoughts on that?
No, I agree, 100% with you, Nina, on that. The political coalition that allowed that previous bill to pass, it would make sense to try to to create something and to have something that would allow for that same sort of coalition to come together, especially with the buy-in from leadership from Schumer. And the price tag is also quite high for, as you said, a narrow beneficiary. So yeah,
Yeah.
we'll
And
continue to monitor on our end too.
yeah, exactly. David will help us on that. And so I love the concept. It's just that we need to make it politically viable. And one way to make it politically viable is having a Republican co-sponsor. And as I understand it, it's not there yet. So what I see this as is a messaging bill for this year, for this Congress. We're we're more than halfway through the end of this Congress, only a few months left. So I see this as a messaging bill that can come in much stronger in the new Congress in 2025 after it's been vetted by a few more arts organizations, a few more members of Congress. But we're very interested in it, and I think I'll just leave it at that. Checking in with you, David, on time.
I've got to scoot, but this was a whole lot of fun. And again, just want to thank you all for the opportunity and for the ability and the honor to continue to work with you all on these priorities. It's incredibly important to me. It's incredibly important to my team, and very much looking forward to the continued partnership.
Thank you, David, for everything you do for us and for the country. Bye-bye.
Thanks, y'all. Take care.
Yeah, I'm going to just quickly try to see if I can answer some of these questions on my own. I want to acknowledge that the Americans for the Arts Action Fund PAC chairman is on board, Lyndon Boozer, who was with me on our last quarterly briefing. We'll bring him back in another one soon with one of our next quarterlies. But let me just see if there are some of these questions that I can answer, and then we'll sign off from there. Where we pick up from is, where do we look to track the subcommittee arts earmark info that has not been decided yet? So the earmark information for FY24, which is the only thing that has been decided now, is now on probably the Committee on Appropriations for the Senate. Maybe you could Google that. And when you come to that homepage, you can see what got funded. You're going to have to go through a lot of data. That's why I said Americans for the Arts is going to work on we're going to go through all these charts of data to figure out which ones are arts related, to have a single document for you to look for. There are some arts related funding earmarks that did happen in the House, but it was kind of camouflaged under a different kind of agency, but it had a lot of arts touch to it. So we'll include those. There aren't a lot of them, but there are some that definitely made it through. And at the moment, no earmarks have even been submitted to subcommittees for you to be able to track, and they wouldn't even post the ones that did get submitted. So I find that the one on the Senate under Senator Murray for the chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee, they have the best information. And I'm going to ask Morgan, who's monitoring this, to put into the chat a link to our earmarks webinar page that we did in February that had a really good document that had, if you look up that PowerPoint that we used, there's some really great links to these appropriation committees of what happened with FY24. So then we go to a question related to, is there any indication about the direction of US Ed funding for arts education? And I have not heard anything different, but I have to tell you, we have a very supportive Secretary of Education who really does believe in arts education. He was a former education administrator at the local level, at the state level, and he always included where he could, because it's more, arts education is more of a state local issue, included arts education to be funded, and he understands the impact that arts education is having with various local state cuts. But I haven't heard of an announcement of some kind of a different direction that they might be going in. But it's a good question, and it's a question that we should ask the Secretary too. So stay tuned. Maybe I'll have an answer in the next quarterly briefing. And then I think let me see, I'm gonna go down to the end of these Q&As. I think we ended here with a very nice thank you from Lori Terrell for today's webinar. And that answers all of our questions today. I hope I didn't miss anybody. Stay tuned for next quarter, and always our legislative updates that happen pretty much on a weekly basis will continue.